Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it's worth starting with a reminder of how we got this process started. NAFTA is, after all, a free and fair and reciprocal trade agreement. There are zero tariffs on 100% of manufactured goods that trade across our borders, zero tariffs on 97% of agricultural products, and very, very few obstructions of other forms. Now, NAFTA needed to be updated because it's an old agreement and the economy has changed. But that's not the real reason that this agreement was renegotiated. The real reason was because we have a trade deficit with Mexico, and the administration deemed that to be unacceptable. So I think it's useful to think about USMCA as consisting of NAFTA with primarily two categories of changes. One is a category of changes that modernize it, takes into effect and basically codifies existing practices in the digital economy. But the second category are the changes that are meant to diminish trade and investment. And this, my colleagues, is what I think is wrong with this agreement. It's the first time we're ever going to go backwards on a trade agreement. The country-specific rules of origins are completely antithetical to a continental free trade agreement and designed to raise the cost to American consumers of buying Mexican cars. The sunset clause, this thing goes poof in 16 years, it's gone. That is designed to have a chilling effect on investment. The ISDS mechanism, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism, is gone virtually in this agreement. And the new negotiations that came in the last few months, labor provisions and the removal of the intellectual property protections for biologics, I think also take us backwards. Be careful about the ITC report. There's no economic growth here. There's a little tiny bit of growth that they attribute to the codification of the existing trade practices in digital technology, but they acknowledge that the trade restricting provisions will diminish jobs and economic growth. And they don't even attempt to quantify the adverse effect of the sunset clause. Finally, on process, in significant ways, it seems to me that this committee is getting rolled, and we shouldn't do that. We're being made increasingly irrelevant in a process of trade negotiation, which is a constitutional responsibility assigned to us. TPA is a delegated authority to the administration, and this agreement, Mr. Chairman, in my view, is not in compliance with TPA. Case in point, an example here is we're not having a mock markup today. As we all know, this is not a mock-up of a draft implementing legislation. This bill was already passed by the House. There's no amendments going to be permitted. No changes can be made. And in the past, every single trade agreement has come before this committee with a mock markup for the express purpose of allowing us to discover whether there's a consensus about some changes, which could be recommended to the administration in the form of amendments, and which could then be incorporated in a final draft. All of that is being dispensed with. So, Mr. Chairman, in my view, we've taken a free trade agreement that needed modernization, and there is modernization, but then we've slapped on all of these provisions designed to restrict trade and investment. We'll get no economic growth out of this, and we, the Senate, and the Senate Finance Committee are allowing ourselves to be marginalized. This should not be a template for going forward, and since it's not compliant with TPA rules, it seems to me it ought to be considered under regular order, where, by the way, there's plenty of votes to pass it under regular order. I think for the sake of the integrity of TPA and for legislative filibuster, we should not consider this under TPA. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.